All right, we're going to fix a problem with our event listener here. So we've got a scroll button, and it's inside an onEvent. This is our next button. And then we read records, and then we create the scroll arrow onEvent. And the problem we're having is this, since this onEvent is inside an onEvent, every time we go to this button, it creates a new event listener. So if we come into the display routine more than once, we have more than one of these, and it creates problems. So let's fix it. So let's just bring this out of here. Let's just copy this. So I just keyboard shortcuts. I hit Shift and then the down arrow, and then I'm copying all these rows, and then Command X, and we're going to bring this event listener out and put it at the top level. And so now then I'm just going to scoot it over. So I highlight the whole thing and I do Shift Tab to move it all the way over to the left to the top level. And that's kind of going to fix it, but we're using this index, and right now that index is defined inside this event listener, inside button 2. So only the code in this event listener knows about that index. So if I was going to run this and try to do this index, the code's going to be confused. It's going to say, when it gets here, it's going to say, what are you talking about? I don't know what the index is. And we'll just show that. So we just display, we got everything good. But now when we hit this right scroll arrow, it's going to say, we can't figure out what index is. And that's because when we do this, we make index local to this event listener. We want it to be understood by the whole program, so we want this to be a global variable. So instead of declaring it here, we need to declare it up here. So if we say var index here, now since it's defined outside of any onEvents or outside of any functions, it is a global variable, so the whole program knows about it. So now when we run it and we hit display and we scroll, it knows what index is, but oops, we can't figure out what records is. Same problem, a little more complicated to solve. So records is defined in here by our callback function. This is kind of complicated, but when we read records, it creates this callback function and passes us all the records it read from the database. So this variable is also local to this read records. So we need to do something tricky to bring these records into the global space so the whole program knows about it. So let's do that. It's a little more complicated. We have to do var, and we're going to create a records array equals blank. But so now this is a global array that our whole program knows about. And when we come into button 2, we read the records. Let's load up that array. And we're going to do that with a for loop. So we're going to say for var I equals 0, I is less than records.length, I plus plus, and then we're going to execute some code. So basically that for loop is saying we're going to loop through all of the records that were returned from read records. And for each one, we are just going to say records array dot push. We are going to push it onto the records array. We're going to add it to the records array. And what we're going to add is records I. Okay, so 3 lines. Basically what it's doing is when we read records, we're getting a list of records back. We're getting an array of records, which you can kind of see down here in the console. We have, this is the call, this is the return from that read records. It's a list of 3 objects. So we've got an array here. We are just basically looping through that array and copying it, adding it to our global array, which we called records array. Okay, so now all of the records read from the database are in our records array, and we can go down here to our right scroll arrow, and instead of trying to read from the list called records, we're going to read from that new array we created. So we just have to change all of these to records array. And everything should work at this point if we spell it correctly. So we need to look at records array.length. Okay, So again, we're doing that. So now this records array is a global variable. The whole program knows about it. So when we run, we hit display, our right scroll arrow works, and we're scrolling through all our books. And when we hit home and we hit display again, we come back and everything still works. There's one weird quirky thing. There's going to be 2 copies in the array, and that's because if you think about it, what have we done? When we come to this button 2 and read our records, we add them all to the records array. So we actually came here twice, so we added these records to the records array twice. And there's a simple fix to make that not happen. All we have to do is say, let's blank out the records array every time we come into this onEvent. So now every time we hit the display button, the first thing it's going to do is clear out the records array so there are no records in there. Then it's going to read from the book recommendation table. Then it's going to load up the records array, and then everything's going to work. Let's just make sure. So this is complicated stuff related to global variables versus local variables, but the key is we had to make that array known to the whole program, and now it works. So it's only, we can come back into this display as many times as we want. Every time we hit display, we're clearing out the records, loading up the records, and we're just scrolling through them nicely. Okay, now the only thing left would be maybe add a left scroll button. You could just basically copy this left scroll arrow and then decrement the index, so index minus minus. But that's worth playing with. That would be a nice little feature. Okay, sorry for the confusion. I hope that helps. Be in touch with any questions.